It's who you surround yourself with will help you grow to the next season. When you're allowing those people to take leadership roles and be a bigger part of the ministry than just their title or role, then you see your ministry start to grow and expand because people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The church is growing the way it's supposed to be.
Hey guys, welcome to the CA Podcast. I'm Chad, and I'm sitting here with Vinny.
Hey, what's up, everybody?
What's up? So, how's your week been?
This week has been fun.
Yeah.
Lots of stuff happening at the house, work, everything.
Yeah.
Life's getting pretty wild.
Yeah, you had a little adventurous thing at the house. Yeah. Flashbacks to sausage, peppers, and onions.
You know what? It was a year ago. Recently, the 1 year anniversary of sausage, peppers, and onions.
No way.
It was. My wife actually commented on it.
Did she?
She's like, it showed up in my feed, and I was like,
that's crazy.
Sausage, peppers, and onions.
Man, that was a culture show classic right there.
I think it was.
There were two things that came out of the culture show that I think most people. It's funny. It's the anniversary of both when you think about it,
right?
Because of the Easter. The Now I'm Alive.
Oh yes.
So that was a fun one.
Yeah, we went back to back, I think. 2 great episodes.
You know, and as you said that is what we did.
Yeah.
We did go back to back.
Yeah.
And that was a whole thing. Yeah. So now he's alive, the pyro in church during Easter, that was something else. You know, not my cup of tea, but hey, you know what? Teach their own. The funny thing is there's another church that did pyro at their Easter production.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great.
But they actually did it like how you're supposed to do it, and not like scorch the ceiling.
Yeah.
But
It wasn't a heavy metal show.
No, it wasn't a heavy. No. Now I'm alive. Yeah.
Pyro everywhere.
That was rough. But then, sausage, peppers, and onions.
So yeah, we've been a year away from that. And then, so that was like pipes in my house, like bursting and all of that. So that was awesome. But this time around, it was the, I don't know what you call it. It's a sump pump grinder that shoots our stuff out to the sewer. That decided it wanted to break all of the seals on it and make its way into my basement. Yeah,
that's great.
Thankfully, not in the basement that is finished.
Right.
The unfinished part of the basement.
Right.
So yeah, it was an adventure last week.
Hey, there you go.
And now we're, because we're actually doing my basement over. We're building a room. And so thankfully none of that got affected, but
that would have been rough.
Oh man, would it have been?
Hey, you know what? It didn't happen. And hey, you didn't have to deal with sausage, peppers, and onions.
No more sausage, peppers, and onions.
And poop on Brian's face.
Right.
Poor Brian.
Poor Brian.
If you haven't seen that,
you should go. We should link it. We'll put a link in the
I'll put a link in
description. I think it's one of the only culture shows we still have on YouTube.
Yeah.
So,
it's the culture show moment. Like I think it's that is something else.
Yeah.
That is probably, because the funniest thing about that particularly is I don't even know. We didn't even plan to talk about it that long. It was one of those like we're gonna mention it.
And then it just kept going.
We just did full theatrics on it.
Right.
And it was hilarious because honestly, up until that point, I didn't even see it as that funny. Like it was funny.
Yeah. Well,
it wasn't that funny.
Gross than funny.
Oh,
but then it just became a thing.
And then we had people at like church for like 6 months coming up and like talking
about it.
And it's like, wow, like, that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So
hey, go check that one out.
Yeah, that's a good one. So so today, have you ever gotten into a situation where you were trying to do something and you took someone else's system, brought it into your own system, and then it didn't work?
So that happens quite often, I would say, in a lot of the stuff that, working in restaurants and things like that, where you try to copy or emulate something else that somebody was doing. And so in the restaurant field that I was in, it was a burger joint.
Yep.
And you look at like the big joints at the time were like the Shake Shack, Five Guys. So we were right in that thing
right there,
but considered probably a copycat of both.
Sure.
Right. And so in seeing that, like we're branding buns, we're doing all this stuff that like to create our own niche.
Sure.
But with keeping the systems that the other places had in place.
Yeah.
And it was like, we couldn't keep up with it. Like when it came to, like prepping all of your stuff in the morning. So our prep times were just ridiculous. And we're like trying to compete with like these other companies and they're making all this money and we're like making pennies because their prep time's nothing because all their prep was done outhouse instead of in-house. So what the company ended up doing was figuring that out eventually. And like our prep time went from like literally, we're talking, so I would have a prep guy for 12 hours a day at times to 3 hours.
Wow.
Right. And so a lot of it went into the manager's hands and things like that. And that's the system that we ended up creating for ourselves, which didn't copy anybody's system, which was way better. But we had to learn that whole thing. Yeah. And it was terrible. Yeah. You talk about like, because when you copy, you're not the original, right? And like the original got it figured out and it's perfect.
And they have things in place of why they did what they did.
Right. And like thinking of a copycat, like I think of like when you're tracing like an art drawing or something, it never comes out as good as the original, right? No. You look at people and there's some people that are excellent at making a copycat or whatever, like artists that can do that kind of thing, but it's never quite perfect as the original, right? Oh, yeah. And I think it's hard when you try to do that. And I think a lot of churches, because we're in the church industry, so a lot of churches try to copy other things that other churches are doing. Yes, and then they're like, well, that doesn't work here. Yeah. Yeah. You know, that why does it, well, it works there. Yeah. It's true. Look at how great their stuff is. It's so amazing. Yeah. And it's like, you try it and it's like, like,
everything comes crashing down.
Why didn't that work? And we've had experience with that. Yeah. Kind of elaborate on some of the experience we've had with that.
Yeah. So like one of the biggest things is during COVID, you know, one of the things that the church had to do was go online, right? So, you know, okay. So go online. Well, you know, in the church realm, there was one church that I think had probably done online right for in how people wanted to do it for probably 2-3 years at that point. Right. I'd say in a perfect scenario, right? But they invested millions and millions and millions of dollars, and that's Elevation. Yep. Right. So they had their online tool pat. They had campus pastors online. They had online people that were commenting. They had, and these were staff. They had online volunteers. Right. They had people from like out of the country that would volunteer to be chat hosts. They had, I mean, when you talk about, they were ready. Right. When the pandemic hit, they were ready. And so what happened is a lot of churches tried to copy their exact verbatim, you can call it script. And what ended up happening was it just crashed and burned. Right. And you had a lot of like disconnect because one of the things is they have all of their campuses are very used to satellite, right? So this is no campus pastors and things like that. And a lot of churches that had multiple campuses went to that type of model. And then what happened is instead of engaging them with their pastor, they engaged with the central campus pastor. And there was a disconnect at the campus level because they were copying the satellite church. So what should have happened is, you know, if you were a campus, you'd have had your own service. Right, exactly. And you would have connected better with your people. Yep. But instead, it was, hey, we're going to centralize everything. Mm-hmm. So that everything, and so what you saw, and you saw this all over, was you saw the fall off on campuses. Right. So then a lot of churches that had campuses then had to either throw their campuses out the window, literally not go back to them, or they had to completely rebuild them almost from zero or from scratch, like from core volunteers. Right. And this goes like, not to bash the like it was a great model. Yeah, it was for their church. It's also a church in North Carolina. Right. Like that's the other thing. Right. You're trying to model after a church in North Carolina when you're not in North Carolina. Right. And you've been doing it though for years before. Yeah. And then it's like, hey, let's do this, right? Right. Like you're a not as big church, right? Don't have as many campuses. Yeah. Don't have the chat hosts or the things in place to do that. Because I think like when you look at it from a one perspective, is like, yeah, it was tough because the campus part didn't work out so well. Right. The script, however, incredible script. Like anything like that was with that, you kind of like, oh, that's great how they say that, how they do this, but you know, could work probably
mostly anywhere, right? But when it
Yeah.
came to like that one-on-one with a person,
Yeah.
it didn't work out,
Yeah.
right? And it
No.
was like so hard to keep the campuses alive
Yeah.
because it was like everybody's going to Central at that
Right.
point,
Yeah.
right? Or to the
Right.
main
Yeah.
campus or whatever you
Yeah.
called your
Yeah.
campus,
Yeah.
you know, and it basically ruined a
Hmm.
campus feeling,
Yeah.
unless you were doing satellite where
Yeah.
the pastor was the main speaker
Yeah.
at all of the campuses.
Yeah, and the thing too is like they revolutionized church online engagement,
Right.
and that's the thing that I think we really learned a lot from them on was how to engage your
Yeah.
online audience.
Yeah.
The problem is what people took is they took it verbatim. So they're like, oh, they have campus groups, right?
Right.
Oh, well, let's broadcast into the campus groups like they're doing.
Right.
Well, I think they stopped doing that at a certain point. I think a week or two in, the way they were doing it, and they even flipped their script
Right.
of the way they were doing it. Well, then you had churches for 4 or 5 months continuing that model, and then you try to go back, and then you find your campus is gone.
Right.
Like in the sense of your attendees they're disconnected.
Right. Where are they? They're at 3 different other places now.
Right. So now they're going back and that was another thing too, is like, the way they handled church, the way you handled church was 2 different things. And so, hey, this church comes back and they've been disconnected.
Right.
Right. Now they're going to go to another church close to them that's back because, hey, they want to feel community. I mean, we saw that happen.
Oh yeah.
And it was national. It wasn't a specific area. You had people saying, well, if you're going to stay closed, then I'm going to go to this other church. But that's the thing.
Right.
They weren't connected during COVID.
Right.
But then you look at these big churches, like, I mean, there's a big church that, well, they stayed closed like almost through half of last year.
Right.
And when you look at their attendance now, they are like skyrocketing. Like their attendance is massive. And it's like they had a different model than anyone else did.
Right.
They were connecting with people and connecting to their people in a way that other churches just couldn't.
Right.
So like people were, bashing them, hey, they're still closed. They were doing some remodeling stuff, but now they're fully open and man, like they're packed all the time. And it's like, hey, you know what? They did something different. But if you took it, imagine if, a local church in West Virginia closed till the middle of 2022. You know what that would be? A closed church.
There'd be no coming back from that.
There's no way.
But that's what a lot of churches did.
Yeah.
And that's what you see a lot of churches around
closed
locally that had to close down. In fact, you see there's a Lutheran church around here.
Mm-hmm.
They both closed, right? And then when they reopened, they didn't have enough for both of them. So one pastor loses their job to the other pastor.
They combined them.
They combined the churches.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah. So, so you look at the different models. Yeah. It just, there's stuff that will work for you that won't work for other people. And the biggest thing too is, and you were making a point before, is like sometimes, and this is just so true, is like you have a model, right? And it's a model for that reason. Right. So you can take it verbatim. Right. And do it. And that's, hey, you know what? You don't really want to tweak it because it's been tweaked. Right. But that's such a, I guess, a niche and like a minute thing, because like you look at things and you're like, you look at cultural things, you look at things, because we were talking about like the cost of food around here, right? I've been back and forth Fort Lauderdale. Everything down there is like very expensive. Right. But one of the reasons it's expensive, everything's a la carte. Right. So, hey, you want a burger? Okay, well, then you got to add your fries. Yeah. You add your drink. Then you got to add, hey, you want a certain condiment. Right. That's an addition.
Oh, yeah, 25, 30, 50 cents, $1, whatever.
Yeah, and so then you're walking out of a place, spending $30-$40 on a burger and fries. Yep. But then you go down here, you get a burger fries for $9. And it's like, but here's,
depends on where you go.
Oh,
you can go to Neater's Diner here and get one for $3.99, bro. Like
$3.99, right? And so like it's kind of funny because like you look at that and you're like, okay, like it's kind of interesting because here's the thing. But then you have people here that will spend a lot of money on other things, right? Hunting, like you look at the general demographic. Like there's a lot of people that'll spend boating. Like there's things here that people will spend a lot of money on. Oh yeah. But then it's like, okay, so people spend money here. So it's like the poverty is like, oh, well, I got to lower my prices because people don't want to spend it. Well, if you have something that's worth selling, exactly, the people are going to pay for it, right? And but and looking at that kind of the way, what I was saying too is that a lot of times people would say that's not going to work here. Yes. Right. Yes. And so there are churches in this area that like
man, this is country. You got to do church differently.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do you? Because if this is country,
right,
you come to our church, and it's it's not.
No.
It's not that. It's very it's very done well.
100%.
Right?
And one of the things I was telling one of my buddies about our church, and I said it feels weird because it almost feels like it was transplanted.
Right.
Like it doesn't feel like it should exist in
here.
It shouldn't thrive the way it thrives, but it does. It's because they have a model and they're working that model. And the thing is like it's basically unbridled chasing after Jesus. And it's like, oh wow, like how funny is it if we direct our attention towards Jesus? And yeah, I get some people don't like the lights and I get that, but at the same time, it's like, what is that doing to hinder you though?
Right.
Like
the fact of the matter though is like Jesus, if I be lifted up,
right,
I'll draw all men unto me, and that should be the model of the church.
Yeah.
The problem is we lift up speakers, we lift up pastors, we lift up worship teams, we lift up all these other things when it comes to the services, and all that stuff will fall away one day.
100%.
The thing that will remain is Jesus, and if you lift him up, your church is going to grow. So what we're seeing is a church where that's what's happening.
100%.
Right? It's not the pastor that's doing it. No. It's not the worship team. In fact, we don't even have worship pastors on staff.
Yeah.
Right? They're not. It's just a whole team that's together now. And it works. Church still works.
Yeah.
Right? It's like what?
It's
right? The lights are still on, things are happening, the song's sounding great. Like, and the spirit's moving.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody the other day and they're like, what's funny about our church is that, people always want like God to move in their church.
Right.
Right. And like what we see the Spirit doing is, the Spirit will move in a service someplace and like, ooh, the Spirit moved today.
Right.
Or the Spirit moved a month ago. Or the Spirit at our church, dude, it's like every service the Spirit's moving. Yeah. Right. And so you can't to copy that.
No. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a tough model to copy.
Right.
Right. When it's led by the Spirit.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
And so and that's what I think, like they probably at some point, I don't know, we've only been here 2 years, tried to copy other things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like it's this, our church is the way it is.
Yeah.
I
mean, a lot of times too, it comes down to the heart of the leader.
Right.
Because like you have in this scenario, you have a pastor who's not chasing fame.
Right.
That's not chasing, trying to be on broadcast television and trying to make a name for himself.
Right.
He's like, no, let me try to create a place where people can come worship God. People can bring their family.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole other thing is like they're very focused on family.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because I was talking to another buddy of mine. He was saying like how, we've stepped away from telling people stories.
Yeah.
But we've also stepped away from like caring about people's family.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you'll have churches that don't invest in, and he was saying that you don't invest in the youth or the kids, because where a lot of times pastors spend the most of their money is where they spend the most of their time, which is on the platform.
Yeah.
So then you have but our pastor's trying to build a school.
Right.
Like that's not normal for a pastor, but it's funny because it's conducive to the environment, it's conducive to the families, and so being a family church, we're able to latch onto that vision.
Right.
And that's the thing, but he's seeing beyond what he sees every Sunday. And he's saying, hey, let's pour in the families. Let's give a place that families can come and get Christian education.
Right.
They don't have to feel like their kids are going to a war zone every day. And so I think seeing that and being like, wow, he could say, hey, let's do this enhancement or this enhancement. And like, that's fine. Like, it's great. Like there's sometimes, you're going to enhance your worship experience.
Right.
But he's saying, hey, look, let's go and let's march on this and make this happen. So I think it's pretty cool, Yeah.
And so like when I was thinking about this and I'm thinking about like a certain denomination in this area, but because they'll keep saying like, and there's so many churches in this area that aren't growing.
Ooh,
in fact, they're dying.
Yeah.
Right. And they'll keep on this thing of, man, but this is how you need to do church here. Yep. This is how it needs to be done here.
Yep.
And I look at it and I'm like, if that's how church is supposed to be done and your churches are closing left and right, I don't want to do church that way anymore. It shouldn't be done that way anymore. The fact is, your churches are dying, right? Or dead, right? They need to be revitalized. They need to come back to life. And it's not going to take the same old, the same country church thing or whatever. It's going to take a new spirit, something new, the breath of God to come in and fill your churches again to make them grow. And if you're not open to that, you're just open to, well, that's the way we do things, then your churches are dead.
100%.
And you're not going to have church the way you used to have it. And then you're going to cry about it and say, where are all the pastors? Where are all the people that should fill the pulpits and whatever? They're not coming to fill your pulpit because you don't want to change.
Right.
And if you don't want to change, you're never going to fill that pulpit and your church is never going to grow again. I'm on a soapbox. I'm sorry, but that's just the facts. And the fact is they tried to copy the way they did it. They did things so perfectly. The way and we'll call it Assemblies of God, or the way the Baptists do it, or the way this denomination does it. And it's like, we did it that way. It's been done for years. Well, times are changing, y'all.
Right. And part of that, and the sad part about that model is it's a lot of times the do it myself model. So the church was like built on, well, you know what, by God, if no one's going to show up, I'm going to do it, right? And they build no spiritual sons, and they'll build no base.
Right.
And then when it's time for them to step down or they pass away, there's nobody trained to get the church.
Good.
And then the church has no heart anymore because nobody carried the heart.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing that we look at our church. Like, there's a lot of people that like they get the vision of the church and they drive the vision of the church.
And even looking at like the other church we were at, you talk about spiritual sons.
100%.
Right. He literally had his sons that were very much on board, but other spiritual sons
so many
that were attached to him. Shout out Pastor Gary and GT, amazing church in Florida. And so, like, you look at that kind of stuff and like you see spiritual sons. Other churches do it great too.
Right.
You know what I mean? And there's a plan in place for the next person or the next pastor or whatever to kind of take over. Whereas you look at some other churches and it's like there never has been or never will be
all about
a plan in place for somebody to take over. And you can see what happens when that pastor leaves. There's a church in we just found out about a church in Rhode Island. The pastor was there for 24 years. 24 years. No plan in place. Nobody to take over.
Wow.
And they're struggling.
Yeah.
They're struggling because there wasn't something in place. He's been there for 25. His family grew up there, whatever. There wasn't, he didn't have a spiritual son or somebody and it's like, man, you need to have that, you know what I mean? Plan. And like, I look at the church that we came from in Rhode Island, and the pastor had a 5-year plan after. He's like, okay, it's 20 years.
Yeah.
We got there in the 20th year, and he said, I'm retiring in 5 years.
Right.
Let me get a plan in place. And he started a plan, found somebody. He's like, okay, I'm going to pour into this guy.
Yeah.
He's going to take over the church.
Yeah.
We knew about it 3 years before the guy took over.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's like, that's how it's supposed to be. Yeah. And that person took it smooth sailing, and he's been there almost 15 years now, 16 years.
Wow.
And it's like that you talk about creating a plan in place. Man, like that's how it should be done. And like we're kind of hitting off of copycat and not copycat and kind of showing you like ways you can adjust and ways you can make things happen or not make things happen.
Of course, yeah.
And like what you see is the people that are making it happen are the ones that are adjusting and figuring things out on the fly, but also have it in place where like, man, I'm going to make it. I want this place to make it. I'm going to leave a legacy behind.
Yeah.
And if you don't set yourself up for the future, right, your future will never be set up.
That's really good. I mean, that's a word right there, man. That's because at the end of the day, and everything kind of wrapping it all up is like, if you're not flexible in some way or another, you're going to get caught up in a trap. And maybe that you may set the trap yourself because like, for instance, if you set up a church, right, you say, okay, this is what I'm doing in our business, and this is how we're doing. And there's things that they're going okay, but they're not going great. and you never pivot, you never try to change it, you never try to raise somebody up to, then eventually that's going to fail.
Yeah.
Because here's the other thing. There's not many churches that survive multiple generations. There's just not.
Right.
When you look at all these churches that are like huge right now, right?
Yeah.
They're like first generation churches, realistically. Some of them are second, but some of them are second in the sense of the pastor got caught up in infidelity or something,
right,
or stepped down young,
right,
and then they survived. And it was more like a church split and then a church rebuild. But you look at a lot of the churches now; they're first generation churches.
Right.
Where are the second, third, fourth, fifth generation churches? They're not here.
Their buildings are being sold off left and right, and
we
and
drive past them and they're closed every day.
And
it's like that's what I'm saying. So like, I think that's the biggest thing is like, if you're not selfless as a leader.
Right.
It comes through in every way, but what it really comes through is at the end.
Right.
End of your life and end of your tenure.
Right.
Your selfishness is gonna come.
Right. It really should happen in the middle.
It should.
Right?
Yeah.
Like like, okay, I've hit my point.
Yeah.
Right. Whether you've been pastoring for 20 years at the same place, right? At some point, it's time.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's time to set up the plan or the next person, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That whatever it is, your next season. Right. And if it's to stay at that place forever, that's great.
Yeah.
But there needs to be more than just you. 'Cause at some point the people, need more than just you.
It's good.
Right. They need other people in place to hear what God's speaking afresh and anew. Right. And not to say that you can't get fresh revelation as you're growing older, but it helps to keep families involved in your church. Right. When you look at you look at the older churches that are out there, right? And typically you attract who you are.
Yeah.
Right. And so you see, at some churches that have older pastors, that's all that there is in the congregation.
Of course.
Right. Now, that's not the case with us. We do have an older pastor, but he's very family oriented and has surrounded himself with family people.
Yep.
And so what you see at our church is families all over the place. Right.
Yeah.
And so and that's what we're saying is like, that's how you have to do it. So it's who you surround yourself with will help you grow to the next season. Yeah. Right.
Oh,
because when you're allowing those people to take leadership roles and be a bigger part of the ministry than just their title or role, then you see your ministry start to grow and expand because people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. The church is growing the way it's supposed to be growing. Yeah. And I look at massive churches right now that you see growing. It's because they have next gen teams. They have that people that are like young adults that are on fire for God, and you see them serving in a capacity in their church that is beyond. And it's like, you look at your elevations, you look at those kind of churches and see, how are these guys? Well, they have that. Yeah. They're focused on the next generation, right? Whereas many people are focused on the other generation. Right. And it's like, we need to keep focus on all generations, right? And let God do what he's doing, right? And hopefully the church will continue to grow.
Yep. So and one last thing I think too is a lot of times, and we see it really, really, really prevalent right now, but the churches are really focused on the masses, right, and not the individuals and the families.
So good.
And so I think a lot of times, you look at the Bible and everything is individuals and stories, and it's like impacting the one. Right. And I think the church is so stepped away from like getting in the life of the one, that we're like, oh well, hey, we had 1,000 people at church today, and it's like, well, yeah, but like you only have 300 people that are core, right? So you have 700 people that are like not being discipled, not going through the next thing, and I think a lot of times too is like, they come in, they get their guest central, right? They get their whatever, they feel that they get to meet the pastor, right? And then that's it. that's the end. Like they got
there's no connection. There's nothing. Mm-hmm.
Right. And then that's it. There's no, the pastor doesn't want to talk to him. Like, I mean, I've seen it. You've seen it, service, as soon as service is off, that dude's off. Gone. He's not in the building.
Yep.
Closing prayer, that man's out the building.
Right.
And I think that's the thing is we've seen churches that like try to do that TV pastor model and it just doesn't work.
Right.
And because, what you have is you end up crushing families and you crushing the one. And then it's really just masses of people that just are attending a concert.
Yeah.
Like that's what a lot of places are. And so I think that's, I think it's,
we kind of came from a church that was number focused. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me,
right,
like I learned something in that season.
Yes.
Right. Where, every number has a name attached to it.
Exactly.
And so for me, like,
right,
when I would always do my attendance and everything,
mm-hmm.
I would have the name next to, okay, how many people are in that family?
It's important.
Here's their name. You know what I mean? And it was like, man, and it made a difference. Like, as I did it, like, I knew who my people were, right? Yes. And, like, I knew how many people were there that I knew who wasn't there.
Right.
Right? The problem with churches today is we get so big, right, with numbers that you can't tell who's there anymore. Mm-hmm. And who's in it, who's not.
Yep.
And I'm learning that in this season right now as being a connections pastor that it's tough to take attendance when you don't know who everybody is. And all because all they've been for the past 5 years is a number, not a name.
Right.
And so for me, I literally had somebody that had been at the church for 16 years yesterday.
Wow.
And I'm like, I don't know your first name. And that's so crazy. I'm like, what's your first name? He tells me his first name. What's your last name? And then he tells me his last name. I'm like, okay, I know your name. I don't know your face. Now I know who you are.
Yeah,
right? Because I've seen everybody's name that's on our
mm-hmm.
on our list, but it's like, man, now I know who this guy is, right?
Yeah.
So next time I see him, I can be like, hey, buddy, you know, it's good to see you again or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like, we got to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
That numbers, and I mean, the Bible has a book of numbers. So numbers are important. The 3,000 were added to them daily. Yeah. That's a number. It's biblical, right? Yeah. We get that.
Yeah.
But there's also a name attached to 100%. That number. And when you make it about the name rather than the number, I believe God takes it to another level.
Well, and so the same church you're talking about, what we used to do too, and incredible was we all used to sit down as a staff every quarter.
Right.
And what would they
figure
do?
Out.
They'd write every single family, every single person, and they go, where are they? How can we get them more connected? Where are they? Do we need to go out to eat with them? Like, how do we, hey, they're attending once a month. How do we get them to attend twice?
Yep.
It was incredible.
Yeah, I'm literally today got a text. Hey, so and so wasn't at church for the past 2 weeks. Can you send them a message? Absolutely. Sending a message. Hey guys, love you, miss you. What's going on? And like that to me is so important. Yeah. Even in like as you're growing, right, to keep on doing those kinds of things.
The follow up.
It's super important because man, you don't want to follow a model where people don't matter and only numbers do. Yeah. Following a model where the people matter more than the number is super important.
Yeah. So cool. Well, what a discussion there. That was fun.
We went a little bit all over the place, but it was fun.
Yeah,
sausage, peppers, and onions.
Peppers, onions. He's alive.
Making people's names important. So.
So,
awesome.
All right. See y'all.
See ya.